Pretty
All right.
bad.
Hi, this is Kirby Sommers
This is Jeremy ROTHE-KUSHEL'S.
for the Epstein Project podcast. But today we're going to call ourselves the Muppets. And Jeremy, do you want to explain why today it's the Muppet Show with Kirby and Jeremy?
Yes, because there was a round table article put out in the New York Magazine Intelligencer titled "The Jeffrey Epstein Mystery Roundtable: 6 Experts on the Most Intriguing and Dangerous Unanswered Questions" by Andrew Rice. And one of the participants, Lachlan Cartwright, who's an editor at the Daily Beast, uh, was asked the question. Actually, they all were asked this question about this crucial question that you and I have been really digging into about intelligence in terms of Maxwell and Epstein. And the question asked was, what about Acosta's reported explanation that Epstein, quote, belonged to intelligence, unquote? Is it likely Epstein was a spy? If so, what would his use have been to the intelligence community? And now I will read what Lachlan Cartwright said. But I'll also point out that none of the participants actually answered this second question, this third question. If so, what would his use have been to the intelligence community? That's a crucial question to be asked and answered, and none of them answered it. But Lachlan Cartwright was the most disgraceful. Lackluster Cartwright answered, quote, "It is total and utter bollocks, propagated by Muppets trying to sell books and podcasts, to say that Epstein was a Mossad asset or part of the intelligence community," unquote.
To which I reply, bollocks to you, Cartwright. And the reason I say that is because as the editor of the Daily Mail, a newspaper that is owned by Barry Diller, who, if some
Or
of you have
the Daily Beast.
the Daily Beast, thank you. That's why I need you. A newspaper that is owned by Barry Diller, who owns the Daily Beast. And by the way, I think I did 1 or 2 podcasts on this subject alone, the Daily Beast, who Barry Diller is, and the fact that Barry Diller sat on the board of directors of Ghislaine Maxwell's Memoir project that vanished from thin air after Jeffrey Epstein was arrested. Barry
And
Diller,
Terramar,
yeah,
Kirby, that was not some kind of in the corner kind of thing. She gave presentations to the United Nations, I believe, right,
9
on
of
behalf
them,
of Terramar, 9 of them about
not
Terramar.
9. And well, we're going to get off topic. I'll come back to the Terramar if you want.
Okay,
So,
sorry.
why are you doing this to me?
Okay, Barry Diller.
Thank you.
Yes, sorry.
Thank you. Remember, I get up at 1 o'clock in the morning every day.
It's too late in the day to take you on this
Well,
many
yeah,
tangents
yeah,
in
yeah,
your
yeah,
day.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I've already put in over 12 hours of work.
Yeah.
But of course, I'm only a Muppet, so I should not get tired nor upset because according to him, I am a Muppet. So, however, to get back to our point, Barry Diller was on Ghislaine Maxwell's Terramar board, and he happens to be married to Diane von Furstenberg. Diane von Furstenberg is in the fashion industry, which has come up repeatedly. Everybody knows the role of Jean-Luc Brunel as a conduit of young girls to Jeffrey Epstein. In fact, it was Jean-Luc Brunel who, for Jeffrey Epstein's birthday, sent him the triplets that are on the cover of my book, Jeffrey Epstein, Predator Spy, who were only 12 years old at the time, so that the fashion industry plays a prominent role. Diane von Furstenberg's first husband was a prince. Her name was never von anything until after she married Prince Igor von Furstenberg. She had 2 children with him. Uh, she had, let's see, Alex von Furstenberg, who is a prince, and another child. Well, here's the thing. Alex is in Jeffrey Epstein's Black Book. And Virginia Giuffre has always maintained that Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell handed her over to not only Prince Andrew, allegedly, but to another prince. She's not been able to recall the name of the prince. However, the only 2 princes that I can think of, and the only one who is in this specific Black Book, because we have to remember the Maxwell handbook for the staff, these books rotated, right? So they were updated all the time with new names. But in the Black Book that we have been privy to, Alex von Furstenberg is in that book. So it is very likely that he might have been one of those 2 princes that Epstein and Maxwell trafficked her to. So I find it really disingenuous. Additionally, the comment, that initial comment, Alexander Acosta belonged to intelligence, was first printed. Where do you think it was first printed, Jeremy?
Well, since you've told me, right here in this publication, the Daily Beast.
Yeah, well, on, and I tweeted this today because I thought, wow, this guy talks like another kind of Muppet that I'm too nice to mention on the air, or even, repeat to anyone who's interviewing me. But it was printed in the Daily Beast on July 19, 2019, because you see, the Daily Beast accepts writers like Vicky Ward, who in fact made that statement in the Daily Beast, in the same newspaper that he's the editor of, but he thinks it's bullocks, and that it's not true. So, I mean, just don't you think that this is just their way, the that we really are living in 2 parallel versus the quote mainstream media, which was outed, by the way, in the church committee hearings in 1975 by Sig Mickelson, who said that the CIA had an understanding with CBS. And at the time, there were only 3 television stations in the United States: CBS, NBC, and ABC. That was Channel 2, Channel 4, and Channel 7. We only had 3. And he said that when he joined CBS in 1954, I believe, that the practice between the CIA and CBS filtering news to the public was already in practice for a very long time. And as you and I discussed, Jeremy, in a previous podcast, that role, we don't know, we no longer need a middle person. So that, frankly, in my opinion, and perhaps more than an opinion, Lachlan Cartwright is a tool of the intelligence agencies.
Yes, and and specific parts of it too. And I would say that his background, he worked for Murdoch back in the UK for, I believe, The Sun. Is basically a it's basically a tabloid magazine, sort of tabloid news magazine, but Rupert Murdoch owned, I believe, when Cartwright worked there. Then he's an editor at the National Enquirer, AMI. That's crucial to the cover up of not only of
100%. Yeah.
yeah, I mean that anyone who knows any background of not only the Epstein story, and then specifically during the last 5 years of the Trump Epstein story, and all the surrounding stuff there, but even other stories in this same realm, knows that it was used, AMI was used as a capture and kill operation, not a media tell-all operation. So that he was there, and then he moves on. Cartwright is also is an editor, I believe, at the Radar magazine, which it looks like Epstein was partially invested in at some point. There's this infamous picture of Epstein, sort of, where he's got his uh, head tilted, and it's sort of a sympathetic picture of Epstein, where he's wearing his Jeffrey Epstein logo. Reminds you of exactly what you were talking about when we were discussing Vysotski's slippers and all of that. But it is Jeffrey Epstein attends the launch of Radar magazine at Hotel QT on May 18th, 2005. Um, but there's also people like Mortimer Zuckerman, who I believe was also directly invested in Radar magazine. But then also Lachlan is also worked for Mortimer Zuckerman's other publication, I believe, in New York City, which is, I believe, the New York Post, I think. And, Mortimer
I
Zuckerman.
think it's the New York Daily News. I could be wrong.
Okay, thank you. Let's see here. Let me see here. New York Daily News. You're correct. Thank you.
Thank you. Since I
Yes.
know that he wrote a story about me in 2001 that's being talked about a lot these days by certain people.
You are so correct. New York Daily News. And Lachlan Cartwright was a column editor at the New York Daily News, Mortimer Zuckerman's publication. And so this is the Israel lobby, really. This is the media arms of the Israel lobby that have been well identified in books like The Israel Lobby by Amir Scheimer and Walt, where Mortimer Zuckerman was specifically identified as part of a key piece of the media arm of the Israel lobby. And Zuckerman talked about how it was like a 92-year-old man being sued in a paternity suit. He said he was so proud he pleaded guilty. He was then also appointed by George W. Bush to serve on the honorary delegation to accompany Bush to Jerusalem for the 60th anniversary of the State of Israel in May 2008, about which you've pointed out there's Wexner was also part of
Yes.
that delegation.
Yeah, they were all there at the same time. That's when Epstein was thinking. It's in my book, Jeffrey Epstein, Predator, Spy People. Everything Jeremy and I discuss, for the most part, is in my books. And I don't know why people just don't read the news from us, the Muppets. I'm trying to get Jeremy to write a book because he's so knowledgeable. So hopefully he will come out with his own book so that he can be mocked some more along with me as being a Muppet. We work a lot, us Muppets. So
Claim my full standing as a fellow Muppet.
Exactly. So the other people that were on this panel were Julie Brown. And while I want to give credit to Julie Brown for having revived the Jeffrey Epstein story, there are some things that I found to be a little naive. But also there was Gabriel Sherman of Vanity Fair magazine. And so we're not going to keep you all because we're going to talk about these conversations that were. Oh, I'm so happy they're here in New York Magazine, because this is where you can come to see how the truth is layered up. We're already looking at the mock trial. So this is the mock, these are the mock statements to cover up the fact that Jeffrey Epstein has intelligence. And before Jeremy and I got on the air today to speak with you guys, he made a very astute observation that I'm going to go to right now. And so it includes Julie Brown. And as I said, I'm very grateful that for her work that did bring to light Jeffrey Epstein's misdeeds when she started her story, which by the way is to be fair to everyone and to everyone who's working on this, like Jeremy and myself, she concentrated only on the victims in Florida. However, she did reach out to, while she was conducting her investigation for her series Perversion of Justice in Florida, she combed through the records to find, I believe, as many as 40 victims who she reached out to. However, Julie Brown, uh, in this article, makes a couple of statements that I found disturbing. One of them was that she believes that Ghislaine Maxwell was in love with Jeffrey Epstein. And she also goes on to make a statement that is being used, and I'm going to just allude to it, and then I'm going to give it back to Jeremy because he's the one that was like, oh my God, this is so twisted. And if Jeremy says that, you've got to hear it from him. But she made a statement that Ghislaine Maxwell is a victim. So Jeremy, were
Oh
you
my gosh.
surprised? I know it
Uh,
was like, ugh, what are we going to say about this?
yeah, it's very disturbing, and like you said, Julie Brown's journalism in terms of finding and giving voice and giving platform to the Epstein survivors in Florida, Epstein Maxwell survivors in Florida, is and was crucial. And at the same time, it's obvious that the this narrative that she continues to attempt to maintain is what it looks like to me is core to the entirety of the way that this Maxwell case has gone down, both inside the courtroom and inside of the media as it's reported on it. That there is, that the focus needs to be very, very close sided, and that anyone talking about the intelligence aspects or the potential geopolitical or the core political implications of Maxwell's operations alongside Epstein, sponsored by whole networks, intelligence networks that include some of the most powerful and wealthiest, men in the country and the world, really. That people like that need to be rejected as Muppets. And although Julie Brown doesn't use that, she's not using that language, and so she's not trying to disparage people like you or people like me who will talk about this and point to the facts that would prove this out. For example, if you were on this panel, you would actually answer these questions with facts backing it up. But the fact that Julie Brown is pushing this narrative of Maxwell is just a victim of first her dad and then of Epstein, and is basically in a similar fashion of someone who just showed bad judgment in relationship to victimizing relationships, seems to be the narrative that Maxwell's legal defense has taken both out in the media and in the courtroom in terms of defending their woman. And it's a fraud. I mean, sure, you could go into some of the deep psychology of this, and I think you actually do that very, very fairly in your book about Ghislaine Maxwell, the unauthorized biography, that you cover her background, her family history in a fair way that gives some voice to this aspect, while also then pointing out that she then was also an active participant in the ongoing network that used sexual predation, sexual violence, trafficking against underage people, boys and girls, but in this case, girls, as a way to do things in the world, in a way to control things, control people, control governments even, and control policy. And so there is a real problem here in terms of this narrative that Julie Brown is pushing. And I'll just read her answer to the intelligence question a little bit, so you get a sense of the way that she answered this question of what about Acosta's reported explanation of Epstein belonging to intelligence. Is it likely Epstein was a spy? If so, what would his use have been to the intelligence community? And Julie Brown answers, quote, I really don't believe it. If that was true, we would probably know by now. I think that Epstein did a very good job of telling people, probably including his own lawyers, that he had connections like that. There would have been no reason really for them to check it out. And it was a good excuse for Acosta to use when he went to try to get confirmed for his cabinet post. If it's the CIA, you're not going to find out. You can't just call and find out whether it's true or not. And unquote. And that's the end of her answer. And no one actually just points out the direct lineage of, okay, her father, Robert Maxwell, is renowned. We still have no proof that Robert Maxwell was Israel's super spy or was a spy doing espionage with other governments around the world. But it's an uncontroversial asserted fact at this point that Maxwell was intelligence and was very intimately involved with the highest levels of Israeli intelligence in the Israeli state, and was given this statesman's funeral that you address in your book too. That's basically proof positive of that, although no one mentions that in their answers, and that needs to be dealt with. Plus all this other massive circumstantial evidence about not only Ghislaine Maxwell, but her sisters, her brothers, especially her sisters, the technology relationship with the highest levels of Israeli intelligence in relationship to Silicon Valley, in relationship to software being brought into the US government. It becomes obvious when someone is not only doing plain speaking, but also a common sense plain analysis of the facts. And so that's why this roundtable is so disturbing.
Well, I'll tell you, Julie Brown and I have been on the same thread, and some of my followers have been very point blank asking her directly, with me as part of the conversation, why haven't you addressed the intelligence aspect? To which Julie Brown's response has been, it's an ongoing story. Okay, so I gave her some leeway because I'm thinking, okay, she's gonna at some point understand and listen to the Alex Acosta statement. I was told to back off, that Epstein belonged to intelligence, but she has now decided to just say, what else did Ghislaine Maxwell really have? Her father was dead. She no longer had that kind of money. She's a victim in the sense that all adults, they are confronted sooner or later with someone in their life that they know is toxic and shouldn't be in their lives. Well, I'm going to say that on a personal level, some of the criticism that one can read on Julie Brown's Amazon book page regarding the book Perversion of Justice. I have not read it, so I can't say what she wrote or what she did not write. But some of the criticism, and again, there are a lot of responses there that may not necessarily be true. But what I have read is that in the book, Julie Brown talks about her dating life, which, and Julie is, roughly around my age. She's over 60. And so for Julie Brown to be writing a book about Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell and the sexual trafficking of little girls, and to then sort of include her dating life, well, people are not interested in their dating life. I never sit here and tell you guys about my dating life, although it would be much spicier than Julie Brown's, to be honest. But that if Julie Brown is naive, it would be to assume that Ghislaine Maxwell, who was trained as a spy by her father, and I detail this in Ghislaine Maxwell in Unauthorized Biography, that she kind of is intentionally not looking at that, and is now giving the prosecution, as you really were able to like pin down very quickly, the excuse that they've been looking for all along. Ghislaine Maxwell is a victim. Well, I want to say about her comment that, oh, well, people don't necessarily, and in fact, some of these people that sat around and were discussing this and who are quoted here, well, nobody really comes out and they, if they say they're a spy, they're lying. Well, that's not true, because there was Larry Spence, or Craig Spence, sorry. Craig Spence was a spy. He was a spy for the CIA, and he was part of the Franklin child abuse case, which has been labeled a hoax. And he would go around and tell, he was very much, and I pointed out again in Predator Spy, that it reminds me of Jeffrey Epstein. You know, they would have these parties. He had access to all of the powerful politicians and the most powerful people in the world. And in reality, what he was providing was access to children for things that we see Ghislaine Maxwell standing trial for today. So, and Julie Brown reads my feed. So, and I write about Craig Spence and his, so can somebody go and say the truth? Yes, because if the truth is too big for people to believe, some people may not believe it. But there is no doubt that Jeffrey Epstein was a spy. And so I find her comments to be disingenuous and naive.
Yes. And what's interesting is then this is coupled in this roundtable with them. The question right after this, and this is interesting, is that after Julie Brown dismisses it, she says, "I really don't believe it." She could have said, "I don't know," if she wanted to remain quote unquote neutral as a journalist. I don't believe in that kind of thing anyways. Like, part of the real role of journalists is to help assemble, to uncover and assemble the truth that matters. That's the only legitimate function of journalism. And if you're not doing that and you're pretending like you're not saying things until it's, there's some kind of signed document that someone is an agent of intelligence, that almost never is going to happen. That almost never happens, or that doesn't really happen.
It
And
never
so,
happens. Never. Nobody ever gives you a document saying, hey, you graduated from the Mossad, or you're working for the CIA. That never happens.
and meanwhile, there is tons of evidence that this network, I mean, Julie Brown knows that this network was extensive, right? She was able to get a group of survivors to speak on the record and give them a platform to speak on the record. But Julie Brown knows that this is extensive. It's not only across many states in the United States, but it's transnational, and it's on the level of thousands and thousands, not a handful or dozens of children who were victimized by this. But there's also the ongoing geopolitics of all of this, such as you point to Robert Maxwell's history, or you could point to someone like Les Wexner's or Mortimer Zuckerman in this case, the long-term press patron of Lachlan Cartwright, the Muppet accuser, and be like, oh, what was the actual geopolitics of the interests backing these narratives? Les Wexner comes out in the immediate wake of the Iraq War to basically help do the paint a picture of the Iraq War, which by the way, go to chapter 8 of the Israel Lobby and U.S. Foreign Policy by Mearsheimer and Walt, and you'll see how crucial the Israel Lobby, which all of these patrons are crucial members of, how crucial the Israel Lobby was to the pushing of the Iraq War as U.S. foreign policy. Many people would say the worst single foreign policy decision in American history, and there's a good argument for that. And who is Les Wexner, this key patron of Epstein Maxwell's network, including the previously wired brownstone, where obviously audiovisual surveillance and recording of high level, powerful individuals was happening, not just for some kind of personal aggrandizement or Epstein getting up on people to make his money or something like that. No, this is an intelligence operation. This goes way back. This is very similar to the kinds of things that someone like Roy Cohn was involved in New York
Yeah.
City. That you've also talked about how that interface very much with the highest levels of our FBI.
Yes.
So this is something that goes on way at a high level. And Wexner was involved in the Wexner analysis in the immediate wake of the launch of the Iraq War to help pitch, to figure out how to pitch to the American people that the Iraq War was in American interests and not in Israeli interests. So for someone like Lachlan Cartwright, who's been employed by the Israel lobby over many years of his life, to then call people Muppets, or that it's a total and utter bollocks to say Epstein was a Mossad asset or part of the intelligence community, is disingenuous at the core of it.
Well,
But then,
but let me just add, thank you for bringing up the Muppet thing again. He also says, ask yourself why Wexner gave Epstein full power of attorney over his affairs. He goes on to, he adds, it is extraordinary. That then allowed Epstein to manipulate Wexner's finances and take control of his private jet and the now infamous Upper East Side mansion. Epstein then parlayed the appearance of wealth to con other rich and gullible men. Lachlan, you're the Muppet, you're the gullible man, or you're just lying outright. I mean, this is ridiculous. The ties between Jeffrey Epstein and Leslie Wexner are not that simple. And the public who has been following this case, they're aware of it. It wasn't just that Jeffrey Epstein handed over the most expensive townhouse in New York City, the most expensive townhouse. This is Manhattan. It's New York City. This is where the very wealthy live. He handed it to him already configured for spying, already configured with a bathroom that where Epstein could hide. It was a steel, what was it? It was coated with, the bathroom was coated, I think it was coated with some kind of steel, kind of the same kind of setup that,
like titanium or something? No.
yeah, I don't have the quote in front of me, but not, I mean, the whole house was over. So he gave him a house that was already had all the instruments put in there to spy on people, and a bathroom so that if anything were to happen, Epstein could hold himself in there. It had a phone in there. It had the ability to just, if there was a fire, for example, the fire would not necessarily get into the bathroom. But he gave him the apartment building next door that now belongs to Howard Lutnick, who is connected to Cantor Fitzgerald. He gave him the building that his brother Mark Epstein is the owner of.
Where that isn't that where Ehud
It's
Barak and his
yes,
military
it's
intelligence crew would hang out in the lobby?
in the lobby, 301 East 66th Street. And do you
This
remember that?
It's just
Well,
totally ridiculous that anyone would think that intelligence is involved in this. Ehud
well,
Barak.
that they would that they would think that Leslie Wexner is a gullible old man. And by the way, so it occurred to me the other day, and I don't have. Do you recall the name of the corporation under which Epstein's brother has 301 East
No.
66th Street? because, and I'm going to have to find that, because it's also a word spelling, and I'm going to really have to find it, and I may not find it during this, but it's connected to intelligence, and it's another word spelling that it's like, oh, I see. So these people left a lot of clues. Um, he also gave him the 727, and by the way, it was reconfirmed during the trial, the mock trial of Ghislaine Maxwell that began 2 weeks ago and might end before we finish this podcast, Jeremy.
Oh
But
my gosh.
the pilots uh came from Leslie Wexner along with the plane. So how do you wrestle control of live human beings from Leslie Wexner with the plane? It just makes no sense. So, so that even testimony that is being gathered in court is not being heard by, Lackland Cartwright.
There's so much to go into here, but in terms of Cartwright, I think that it's hard to avoid the notorious Upton Sinclair quote of, "It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it." I think it's fairly simple in terms of the issue of
Right.
Cartwright. Now, in terms of the larger aspect of both not only this roundtable, but also of this case, the sham of the way the trial has been
Mm-hmm.
run in many ways. I think you very presciently pointed out that that not only was intelligence not going to be featured at all or being involved or even mentioned either inside the courtroom or in terms of the media analysis of it, which is basically largely proven out by this roundtable, even though they then address the elephant in the room in terms of the question itself. That you point out that we actually saw intelligence on full display
Yeah.
as the nature of how intelligence will run a sham trial. And then that would then include the media narratives surrounding it, both the run up to it, the during, and then eventually the wake of it.
I mean, when I was on Sean Atwood's show, and this was a long time ago, when I think it was probably right after she was arrested. Um, and the question I was getting at that time was, well, what do you think is going to happen? And I would say, I think this is going to be a behind closed doors trial, kind of like the Iran Contra stuff, because there's going to be stuff that's going to leak out. Well, it kind of really did happen that way because 1 month, well, what, 2 or 3 weeks before the trial began, uh, the change happened in New York where the COVID restrictions were modified, giving the individual judges, in this case, Judge Nathan, the ability to say, we're going to allow the public to listen in via the phone system they had set up, which we had all used and had called in. It was still a federal trial, so no, it's not going to be televised, as we have discussed before, but we're going to at least be able to call in, only for us to find out, no, we're not going to be able to listen in unless you happen to be one of the very few people in the courtroom. And so where is the public going to get news about this case, the most important case? From mainstream media, from people that are denying that this was part of intelligence, from people who are claiming that Ghislaine Maxwell is a victim. So the public will never really see the intelligence thing. Additionally, the documents have been redacted. And in fact, some of these documents have appeared in the Virginia versus Virginia versus Maxwell defamation case of 2015, which was settled in 2017. And they were not redacted then, but they're redacted here. Photographs have been redacted. Flight logs have been redacted. Just there's a complete blackout. It like there was one day, Jeremy, that documents were handed out and the whole page was redacted. It's just like, what is this trial about? And the trial, as we know, was scheduled to begin on November 29th, last through January 6th. And, and suddenly we might be finished today. And it's not even day 12. And the reason is because we had one of the days last week, one of the attorneys was ill, and Judge Nathan told everybody to go home. And then she took
And
a
that was on the,
3-day
by the way,
break,
that was on the day that Annie Farmer was going
scheduled
to
to testify.
testify.
Yes.
And so there's something even where that just becomes destabilizing at some level. Now, Annie
Oh,
Farmer was
can you
able
imagine?
to really nail her testimony. Uh, but you can imagine the way that that kind of disruption, everyone shows up and then everyone goes home. That's sort of standard protocol for for destabilization in legal
Oh,
matters.
yeah. So that Annie Farmer, who they all knew, I mean, that she was going to be a solid, reliable, credible witness on the stand, for her to go into court that morning expecting to be called to testify. She was the fourth of the 4 victims. The 3 previous to her broke down on the stand and cried. But Annie Farmer is a really well composed individual. She's a smart person. She's got this inner strength to her. So people, I believe, both the prosecution and the defense, and I believe even Judge Nathan, had to know that nothing was going to rattle Annie Farmer. And for them to do that, I think that was almost, I mean, could it have been intentional? And then Annie Farmer has to go and regroup. Will she sleep that night? Will she not? And then go back. And, she's amazing because she nailed it. She nailed it when she went back. And she did not break down. In fact, when they tried to say, well, you said this on this date, her response was brilliant. And as a writer, I appreciated it because she says, well, that word can mean this word and this word. So what's the difference?
Mm. And
Right.
from the,
So
yeah.
yeah.
From the outside looking in, I just want to say that what I've seen is that these disruptions at specific moments when certain things came up in testimony, even. For example, the latest one I read about was when Judge Nathan apparently immediately interjected and disrupted questioning when it began to talk about Harvey Weinstein. And
Oh
then
yeah.
an immediate break is taken, and then they recompose the courtroom, and it's not going back to that at all. And
Not
then in
bringing
the
up his
middle of
name.
yeah, and then in the middle of all this, like you begin to talk about Judge Nathan, or Allie, as her sponsor for her promotion, Chuck Schumer, who the self-identified, he says God named him to protect Israel in the U.S. Senate. Uh, he calls her Allie, and she took a 3-day break. It looks like she shut down the whole trial for 3 days
Yep.
in
To
order
go to
to
Washington.
go do a job interview. Really, can you imagine if a juror said, "Oh, Your Honor, I need to break, and we need to break the whole trial for 3 days so I can go do a job interview," which is what, okay, we're considering that, that the step up to the appellate court is an illustrious thing. So it's more important than a juror's job interview for a managerial position somewhere. But this is what essentially Judge Nathan did, was shut down the trial for 3 days so she could go to Washington, D.C. to be introduced as Allie by Senator Chuck Schumer for her job interview. And that to me is, the fact that that happened right in the middle of the trial. You begin talking, Kirby, about this nomination by Biden via her Nathan's sponsor, Chuck Schumer. And by the way, of course, Biden, long-term Rickless friend and associate, part of the
Very long
network.
term. He was discovered in his 20s and in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is where the Rickless family held the headquarters for McCrory's, which was a very large 3,000 store chain of like five and dime stores uh, all over the country. And that is where Meshullam Rickless sort of saw this man and decided, okay, he reminds me of John F. Kennedy, who he had also helped because he was friends with Kennedy Sr. And in fact, bought from him RKO, a subsidiary of RKO, and Kennedy ended up asking the Zionists, like specifically Rickless and his friends to back his son because they wanted him to become president. And the meeting happened at the Pierre. And again, I write about this in my books. And Meshullam Rickless, who until the day he died had a very heavy accent. He never became like Robert Maxwell with a very suave speaking voice, but he retained a very heavy accent. He walked into the Pierre Hotel, into Kennedy's suite with a couple of guys, also Zionists. I do not recall. At one point, I knew who the names were, but I don't recall them anymore. But this was in mainstream media at some point, and that has been scrubbed. And he handed JFK, and it was whether it was an envelope or a suitcase, but it had $200,000 in it. And I was going to say request, but I'm going to change the word, and I'm going to use, and the instructions were, this is so that you can help the state of Israel. And then if you do that, us Zionists, we will back you. And he then saw Biden, and Biden was a good-looking young man, and he basically cozied up to him and decided, okay, he's going to put his money in. And the reason they do it, these guys, because Meshullam Rickless is a Leslie Wexner, is what Leon Black will one day aspire to become, is that these are the puppet masters. These are the men who run the world behind the curtain. So that he decided, okay, well, Biden will do our bidding. And told him, we're going to position you like Kennedy. And so if you listen to a lot of the early Biden speeches, he compares himself to the Kennedy family many, many times. And he does that because that was how he was trained by Rickless. So there is a photograph of one of Isabel Maxwell's friends, Laura Goldman, who is also a friend of the Maxwell family, when she was young, with a very young Joe Biden in front of, at some event at the White House. And people think, oh, well, no, Maxwell cannot know Joe Biden. Well, her father introduced her to the heads of the countries that he was doing business with. I'm sure she met Ronald Reagan. She certainly knew Donald Trump. She certainly knew Clinton. And she certainly knows Biden. But yeah, so it was Biden decides to give a promotion to Judith Nathan right before the trial. I was like, wait a minute.
Allison
Yeah.
Nathan.
Well, isn't her name?
Oh, Judith. Her middle name's Julie. Yeah.
Right. So it's Allison Julie. Right. Thank you. She did it, and it was done before the case began, which I'm thinking, wait a minute, usually it happens after, the way it happened with Alexander Acosta. He got his promotion when Donald Trump became president. He was like, okay, it's because they don't necessarily do it in a timely manner. And this, I was like, oh, I see, it's a pre-thank you. Because Trump apparently was talked out of. I don't know if I told you this. Tell me if I told you this, Jeremy. Trump was going to pardon her. You know that much, right?
I've read that, yes.
Okay, and then it was I forget which book, but it's one of these newer books written by people who used to work with Trump. And I don't recall the name of that particular book, but this guy wrote that Trump was talked out of giving her a preemptive pardon because they pointed out to him, if you do this, then you are removing the federal level, and they may go after her on the different state
At the state
districts.
level. Huh.
Yes. So that Trump was going to pardon her, but Trump, by the way, is a friend of Joe Biden's too. They've hung out, and I know this firsthand. They've hung out. So Trump left it to Joe Biden to take care of. So yeah, no, I think it's absurd. You're in the middle of what is arguably the trial of our lifetime. For some reason, they think this is not a big deal. That's a slap in the face to the jury and to the victims again. So she goes off for her nomination. Why can't this wait? This trial is going to end up being over today, the latest Monday, because today we have Eva Dubin on the stand earlier. So, but that's it. From 35 people they were going to have appear, it's gone down to less than 5. It's like, and nobody wants
and
to
wrapping
show up.
up on a Friday, apparently.
And wrapping up on a Friday, yeah. It doesn't seem like that nobody even wants to show up to court because they don't want to face the wrath of us, the Muppets.
It begins to feel like that the whole, even the whole mock trial seemed to have been whittled down under some kind of pressure, and then including this 3-day hiatus, which included Judge Nathan going to DC to try to get her award or whatever it is. I mean, I'm not saying that she's not qualified, but there's something else going on here, as you pointed out, in terms of the timing of all of this and the announcements of all of that. And I just wanted to point out a little bit more about her background. Before I do that, I also want to just say, when you were breaking down the background of the Ricklesses and Biden, I think you already pointed this out. You already put the facts on the table for people to understand this. But I want to re-emphasize that this is not, your average sort of, AIPAC supporting millionaire family. No, this is a billionaire crew, and Meshulam Rickless looks to have been a key patron of the Prime Minister of Israel. Ariel Sharon helped him get his ranch, where all kinds of big decisions went down. And so that's the scale that we're talking about here, in terms of when you assert Biden being part of this network. It's that the Ricklesses are at a very high level, especially in terms of the relationship between the United States and the highest levels of the Israeli government.
Yes,
So
it was, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just
no,
don't
let's
want
go
to
for it.
forget that Rickless was with Ariel Sharon and Rafi Eitan when they were giving instructions to Robert Maxwell. So Robert Maxwell, as much of a super spy as he was, is beneath Meshulam Rickless and the Rickless family.
Thank you for clarifying that, because that then puts that network at the epicenter of the
Yeah,
Maxwell
they gave
case.
the orders. They give the orders.
And so I would then want to just point out a little bit more about the background of of Judge Nathan even. And you know what's interesting too is that a very recent Nathan had made a decision about releasing Michael Steinhardt, who's another key billionaire from this very same network, part of the so-called mega group, all that whole crew. But also, Steinhardt's father was a jewel fence specifically for Meyer Lansky, and then Steinhardt then becomes the dean of the Birthright Israel program. But Nathan oversaw a case in which she dismissed the claims of, I think, the Turkish government against him for basically stolen artifacts of some sort, which now he's been held to account for just very recently. So that's an interesting piece of the background here. But in terms of Nathan, Judge Nathan's actual political service and background, she worked for Senator John Kerry when he was running for president in 2004, which is the most infamously known episode of apparent election fraud that I'm aware of, at least in the contemporary American context, where it was Ohio, by the way. Go look at,
Right,
once again, Bob
right.
Fitrakis has
Mm-hmm.
the goods on this. In terms of the Ohio election fraud, apparently, that was used to steal votes from the Kerry voters. And Kerry's people, and that's now admitted, Kerry's been on public radio in the last years admitting that they knew that they had evidence of election fraud at the time, but for different kinds of reasons were remained silent on the matter, couldn't find legal standing. So the fact that Judge Nathan at that time was one of his key legal advisors,
Well,
I
he's
believe.
also Skull and Bones.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Right. The 2004, as
Yeah,
what's his name, Tim Russert pointed
yeah,
out, the late
yeah.
Tim Russert pointed out, is it a problem that both you and George W. Bush are part of the Skull and Bones
Uh-huh.
Society? The conspiracy theorists are going to have a whole
Well,
thing
no,
with
I
this.
mean,
There's
and this is what Nathan has in common with Carrie. So, I mean, like I tell people, it's a funnel, and it's wide at the bottom where we sit, and it gets very narrow as you ascend to the top. And you
And
know, we're
Kerry, of course, is also in the Epstein Black Book, and it's very
right. That's
possible that
right.
he was even in England in the run up to the Iraq War with Epstein. Now that's not been proven out, but that is a possibility. And so, that relationship there, in addition then to the fact that Nathan, in one of these moot cases in New York City, where I think it was Spitzer versus Dershowitz, praised Dershowitz's defense of some kind of Talmudic argument or something like that. This is Dershowitz, who's a credibly accused suspect in this network, but in addition, the lawyer to this network. And
Right.
so there's a lot of issues here in terms of Judge Nathan's background. And then the last thing I want to point out is then Judge Nathan then also served early on in the 2008 Obama administration, 2009 Obama administration, I believe. Um, and she seemed to have served a crucial role there. This was on the run up to Obama becoming really the drone king and really fully institutionalizing the targeted assassinations, which, by the way, Judge Nathan's wife is an academic expert apparently in the law surrounding targeted assassinations, alongside things like Haiti. Think of Clinton
Right.
Foundation, all of that. But finally, Judge Nathan, at the time of her appointment to the Obama administration, it appears that she was a key advisor in opening up the U.S. military to LGBTQ Americans, and to basically repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And that policy was very positive policy. But the way that I see it is that in the run up to the escalation of the quote unquote war on terror and the escalation of targeted assassinations around the world by the Obama administration, that they were basically what you might call pink washing the use of the U.S. military at a crucial time when there was going to be this escalation of the use of the military for targeted assassinations. So I just wanted to point that out. And now that's my personal analysis of the matter. But I just wanted to address that. And there's some other things in her judging background, including a case surrounding an associate of the al-Awlaki character, very shady character in terms of Al-Qaeda connections, but also a lot of assessment about whether he was an intelligence asset, including being at the Pentagon, a Pentagon banquet in the days after September 11th, and then he becomes the arch target of the drone king Obama for assassination, including the apparent killing of his teenage son. So there's a whole bunch of background here that I think people who are deeply interested in the outcome of this sham trial should look at in terms of the judge who's presided over all of this.
Those are very good points. So this morning, Eva Dubin took the stand. She was, I believe, the third witness. And it's interesting because this is a woman who is said to have been Jeffrey Epstein's girlfriend, and I'm going to use air quotes for that. But when she took the stand, she tells the courtroom, "I am Eva Anderson. I also go by Eva Anderson Dupin." Goes to show you how committed of a wife she is, especially when she says, "I'm 60 years old." So that is somebody who's 60. This generation was used to dropping their maiden names, but certainly not Eva, who was still Eva Dubin, but she also goes by Eva Anderson Dubin. And she is the mother of 3 children, ages 27, 25, and 20. One of these children is Selena Dubin, who there are photos of Selena Dubin in Jeffrey Epstein's home. One of them is a very controversial photograph that has been submitted to the court, but also Virginia Giuffre has alleged that they were her quote tester couple, that she gave Eva, when she was pregnant with her 3rd child, a like just a regular massage. She writes about this, by the way, in her diary, and that she went on to give a massage to Glenn Dubin, and that it became that type of massage, the kind that Virginia alleges also happened with the Ehud Barak, and also happened with Prince Andrew, and also happened with Leslie Wexner. And I can go on naming names because Virginia has dropped these names for the 2 years that she has been tweeting online. And if you've been following Virginia, which I suggest you do, she's at VRS Virginia. She pretty much gives the people additional information that, yeah, she's talked about in court. Now, she's not saying anything right now, I think, on advice of her attorneys. However, while Eva Dubin is on the stand, someone who is now going to be, I think, like the rest of them did, I don't know if I can use this word. Tell me if I can. Can I say allegedly perjure themselves?
Oh yeah.
Okay, I can say that. Okay, great. She's going to just say how I'm sure her testimony is going to be how wonderful Ghislaine Maxwell is, because they were really good friends for a long time. And in fact, it was Eva Dubin, if you remember, when Jeffrey Epstein was arrested in Palm Beach, who wrote a glowing letter saying how she would trust Jeffrey Epstein with her children, that he was a family member, and by the way, this is the same Eva Dubin and Selena Dubin, her eldest daughter, who were in Jeffrey Epstein's home, who dropped by when Bill Gates was at the house. And Bill Gates found this Swedish woman and her child, who was by at that time 16, to be so enjoyable that he stayed much later than he thought. And that's the New York Times article that is allegedly the reason that his wife suddenly decided to leave him. So today, with this Eva Dubin becoming a witness, Judge Nathan said, okay, it's time for a break.
Whoa.
I know. I mean, come on. And it's so anyway, what do you think is going to happen at the end of the mock trial for Ghislaine Maxwell? Does she go home with Scott in the yellow submarine?
We all live in a cargo metric NSA submarine. No, I don't know. That's it depends on how surreal this reality is. I can see her being convicted on some things. Actually, it will become very interesting in relationship to the jury and how they see all of this. I think so that it actually will. This case will actually become way more interesting after the case is settled in the courtroom and it goes on to jury deliberations, actually. And I could see it going both ways. And I could see the intelligence networks, obviously, that are the sponsors of Maxwell Epstein. That's right, Cartwright. The Muppets are saying the obvious reality that they could benefit from both ways here. I could see it from Maxwell escaping any form of justice in relationship to this case, and then also potentially being locked up, and then it being said that this thing that we got to the bottom of it, and there was some justice, and there's nothing left to see here. But no matter what happens in the case, there's a lot more to see here, and we will continue to dig it up and dig it out and to help assess it and analyze it, so that we, the people, can actually get to something that might look like justice via the truth. And it's not going to happen no matter what happens in terms of this case. I hope there's a bit of justice, but I'm not counting on it.
I'm hoping for that too. I could see this, even if she were, let's say she was sentenced. I'm so I don't trust the system the way I might have 20 years ago, so that I can see them saying, even if the judge said you're sentenced to 20 years in prison, like they do with the cartel kingpins, and then like 3 months will go by and suddenly that person is allowed to go home, and there's just a tiny little snippet written about it and the public doesn't really know. So if she's sentenced to more time that she's already served, and she's served just shy of 600 days at this point, I think she's going to just be allowed to go home under some kind of arrangement like that. But it's also possible that the judge can, that the jury can decide that she's already been in court, especially she has attempted to show her humanity in front of the jury, who doesn't know what we know, so that she goes into the courtroom and she hugs her attorneys, and then she hugs her sister, and then she hugs her brother, and so that she looks like she is a loving human person, where the way that I look at her is more of like a villain in a horrible Hannibal Lecter, to use their own kind of movie, that she just stepped out of this horrific thing. And really, that's what we're seeing. We're seeing an actress. We're seeing a grand master illusionist. She learned something from David Copperfield and from her father, and she put on a fabulous act. And so it will be for the jury to decide who are they going to believe? Are they going to believe this woman, former socialite that mainstream media is still trying to figure out if I'm going to call them out? So a few of them have started to say former girlfriend of Jeffrey Epstein. Will they believe this former girlfriend? Oh God, I can't even use that word. The former House in charge of everything woman, Ghislaine Maxwell, or will they believe 4 women who had to relive their trauma? And so I'm hoping that the jury will believe the 4 women who had to relive their trauma and see that some of the shenanigans that played out in front of all of us, including them, were wrong, and that, you know, instinctively some of them will feel something was off here. Right, Jeremy? And then I'll,
Yes.
okay, go.
I hope that that's the case too, and even if that were to happen, and I hope it does, I would just point out that this previous case that Judge Nathan was a part of that involved an Al Qaeda operative. Guess who the defense attorney was there in terms of the sealing of that obvious intelligence asset deal? It was Sternheim was the defense attorney for that case too. So
Wow.
there is a background here of the sealing up of intelligence assets, including in that case. Apparently, Judge Nathan helped make sure that certain documents were sealed and put away, where there will be some kind of justice deployed, but it's usually deployed in relationship to putting some kind of intelligence asset to rest. And Al Qaeda itself obviously is an intelligence asset from the days of back when it was the Mujahideen and was being supported and managed by the highest levels of certain elements of the U.S. Intelligence community, combined with the then Mossad station chief in D.C. setting up in Congressman Charlie Wilson's office in order to set up the Mujahideen, which ultimately became the base, the Al Qaeda.
Char
And then, yeah.
By the way, Charlie Wilson, we should do a whole show on Charlie Wilson in the future.
And maybe even one on Sternheim herself.
But yeah, I think there are like so many
You know.
interesting characters that we can expand upon so that the audience can get a, because this is just the tip of an iceberg. There's a giant structure around and underneath it, that most people just don't see. They keep their eyes focused on names that they recognize. In any event, it's the Muppet Show for today, guys. And so uh, it's Kirby Sommers, Muppet, I guess, number 1, and
Jeremy ROTHE-KUSHEL'S, co-Muppet.
co-Muppet. And fingers crossed, we'll do this again. Have a good day, everyone, and happy holidays.
Goodbye, everybody.